nations are represented by feminine figures such as Mother India or the French Marianne or Mother Island or Britannia, this gendering is not random, but rather embedded. Can you hear me? Mm-hmm. But rather embedded in a particular narrative of nation. In this presentation, I unpack the relational dynamic between masculinities and femininities in a particular interpretation nation I term muscular nationalism and examine its manifestations in the Indian context. I begin with the concept of muscular nationalism and then move on to discuss how this concept has intersected with Hinduism to create what I would argue is a Hindu muscular nationalism, and then end by analyzing the manner in which this version of muscular nationalism exists in an uneasy juxtaposition with the nation as imagined by a transnational middle class created to a certain extent by India's 1991 liberalization reforms. Briefly put, muscular nationalism is an intersection of a specific vision of masculinity with the political doctrine of nationalism. Muscular nationalism centers the values of martial prowess, physical strength, and readiness to go to battle against groups defined as enemies of the nation, usually, although not always, defined as an effeminate other. Further, these values are most frequently expressed by a male body. The relationship between womanhood, and muscular nationalism is dynamic. This nation as woman can take multiple forms: powerful mother, vulnerable virgin, or warrior goddess. However, regardless of what form of femininity is embodied in muscular nationalism, chastity is a concentrate of the female body, which both symbolizes national honor and provides a moral code for the lives of women in the nation. Put another way, muscular nationalism generally centers a gendered binary, martial man, chaste woman. In muscular nationalism, this focus on the purity and chastity of female bodies stems from their role as border guards. By border guards, I mean the notion that the boundaries separating we the people from them are represented by chaste women's bodies. This line of thinking argues that our women are chaste and pure, and yours, i.e. enemy of the nation, however defined, are not. This is the difference that separates our nation from yours. Women's role as border guards requires that their purity be vigilantly guarded. In India, the proponents of Hindu nationalism, or Hindutva, have expressed a particular interpretation of muscular nationalism. Hindu nationalism, very briefly and simply put, argues that India is Hindu and that minorities can reside in India only if they accept Hindu cultural dominance. Hindutva ideologues repeatedly link the decline of Hindu glory to a decaying martial spirit. According to this perspective, Hindus were conquered first by the Muslim rulers and then the British, both articulated variously as mighty warriors and/or sexual predators because of the erosion of manhood, read as muscular strength and military might. Therefore, in an attempt to resist perceived humiliation over time, Hindutva ideology centers the retrieval of manhood. This is illustrated by public addresses by various leaders associated with Hindu nationalist parties, their public actions, and party literature. This idea of manhood was eloquently captured by the image of a male Hindu activist holding a staff, face distorted in anger, depicted in Outlook, an Indian news magazine. In addition, the reconfiguration of the Hindu deity Ram from an androgynous figure to an aggressive masculine warrior also illustrates this emergent masculinity. In Hindutva posters covering the walls of Indian cities during the agitation for a Ram temple in Ayodhya, the divine icon's muscles rippled as he towered over a Hindu temple, protecting it against aggressors. This is the picture of Narendra Modi, the chief minister of Gujarat, that the wrestler has inked on his body. This image of armed masculinity is not isolated. It exists side by side with images of female virtue. The literature disseminated by Hindu nationalist women's organizations repeatedly emphasizes the need for women to provide a moral compass for the nation by protecting their chastity and behaving in a virtuous manner. This gendered tension is nicely illustrated by the reactions of the proponents of Hindu nationalism to the screening of Deepa Mehta's film Fire, a story of same-sex love in the 1990s. Although protests broke out all over India, some of the most destructive occurred in Mumbai. A group of male and female Shiv Sainiks, activists of the Mumbai-based Hindu Nationalist Party Shiv Sena, led by Meena Kambli, local leader of this party's wing, vandalized 2 theaters in the city of Mumbai. After the violence ended, Meena Kambli explained the motive behind such extreme form of political protest. Quote, "Films like Fire have a bad influence on Hindu culture. The majority of women in our society do not even know things like lesbianism. Why expose them to it?" End of quote. It can be argued that the Sena's condemnation of same-sex love is rooted in a greater fear of such challenges to the patriarchal Hindu family celebrated by Hindu nationalism. Indeed, women Shiv Sainiks were well aware of this cultural change. For example, when queried about why she objected to the film, Meena Kulkarni, a Shiv Sena activist, claimed, and I quote, "If women's physical needs get fulfilled through lesbian acts, the institution of marriage will collapse and the reproduction of human beings will stop." End of quote. The prior protests highlight another dynamic among violence, masculinity, and femininity in muscular nationalism. Rather than inciting men to violence, Shiv Sena women actually acted violently by attacking movie theaters in Mumbai. But these female warriors did not challenge or disrupt the logic of muscular nationalism because their violence was enacted in the name of policing female virtue. Although they may express martial anger, it is still explained by the important role of women as border guards of the nation. As Hindu muscular nationalism unfolds in India, this country's integration into the global economy because of the 1991 liberalization reforms have led to the construction of another version of muscular nationalism that sits uneasily with Hindutva. So this is the picture of Katrina Kaif, a model turned actress who on the April 2004 cover of Indian Cosmopolitan. Inside, a special pull-out section showcases Bollywood star Salman Khan, who stares directly at the reader while a black t-shirt frames his bulging muscles. The colorful pages of the magazine not only provide beauty tips or dating advice, but also advertise a multitude of global consumer products, including L'Oreal, Revlon, and so on. These images, scholars have noted, signify a radical shift away from a tightly regulated economy which until the 1990s was close to Western economic and cultural influences. This consumer culture emerged from the material conditions of globalization facilitated by the economic liberalization reforms, by the 1991 liberalization reforms. This consumer boom is tied directly to the growth of what Steve Durney terms the transnational middle class, which is primarily defined by a taste for cosmopolitan consumption and marks a significant shift away from the tenets of Nehru, which emphasized a social responsibility and a notion of restraint on consumption appropriate for a post-colonial country struggling with issues of poverty and illiteracy. In contrast, the new transnational middle class perceives conspicuous consumption as a signifier of a new India, which is no longer a marginal player in global economic politics. Indeed, India's perceived move from the margins to the center of the global economy has created a self-confidence and strength amongst the members of this class who see their country as a powerful presence on the global stage. In a way, it can be argued that the Nehruvian phase was defined by a nationalist middle class faced with the task of operating a nation in which it was grossly outnumbered, not all that rich, and politically insecure. However, the new transnational middle class, strengthened by its new global capital, does not hesitate to assert its confidence. These economic and cultural shifts define the context against which a reconfigured vision of Indian nation, militant, aggressive, muscular, is unfolding. On May 11, 1998, India detonated 3 nuclear devices. These were followed closely by 2 more on May 13. Gopal Oza argues that newspaper editorials and public celebrations indicated that these nuclear tests were clearly seen by the citizens as a, quote, performance of militant strength and restored national virility, end of quote. The resonance of this view of national manliness did not fade away because almost 10 years later, India's preeminent English newspaper, the Times of India, the primary readership of which is the transnational middle class, initiated the India Poised campaign. This campaign was inaugurated by a 2-minute video featuring an aging but fit Bollywood superstar Amitabh Bachchan, which emphasized the new India's strength and claimed that the world is looking at a, quote, pulsating, dynamic new India, which no longer boycotts foreign-made goods, but buys out the companies that make them instead, end of quote. These brash and self-confident words launched the India Poised campaign, which aimed to, quote, put together a few transformational ideas and solutions for an India whose only real obstacle is to progress itself. As Leela Fernandez has argued, this assertive self-confidence differs from the post-independence Nehruvian years. This campaign would juxtapose with the masculinist language lauding India's explosion of nuclear explosives and the production of a series of very popular Bollywood films, Border, Mission Kashmir, Sarafrosh, Rang De Basanti, Jodha Akbar, and the list goes on, centering an adult male muscular body ready to sacrifice for the nation, indicate that the Indian nation is being reconfigured culturally with specific interpretations of manhood. And I bring up Bollywood because it is worth mentioning that scholars have noted over and over again that Bollywood has significant sociocultural impact on India, and the films it produced are influential cultural texts in India. The India Poised campaign, as I pointed, relied on a Bollywood superstar to lend credibility to its nationalist message. Thus, images of nation and manhood reflected in these films become an important representation or signifier of a reconfigured nationalism. The muscular body represented in popular films do not exist in isolation. Young, well-built male bodies are as dominant images of masculinity are being circulated in film, as well as print and television advertising, as depicted by the body of Salman Khan. These images are noteworthy because they demonstrate a move away from the earlier dominant public images of manhood, which tended to be unmuscled, soft, and non-martial. When India's new national self-confidence is coupled with these changing images of manhood, it appears that the role of masculinity and nationalism becomes quite provocative. It is worth mentioning that I am not arguing that the intersection of masculinity and nationalism is new in the post-1991 period. Indeed, scholarship has indicated that masculinity was an important component of 19th century nationalism. However, I would argue that the self-conscious, explicit desire to be aggressive is somewhat new. The transnational middle class's focus on consumerism notwithstanding, there is a simultaneous anxiety about retaining an authentic Indianness faced with the forces of global cultural influence. The Hindutva movement clearly identifies this with an emphasis on the importance of retaining Hindu cultural values centered on the middle class family through chaste, virtuous, and proper behavior of women as wives and mothers. Feminist scholars analyzing the discourse surrounding Indian beauty queens Bollywood films have argued that even cultural vehicles not explicitly aligned with Hindutva represent this anxiety through the bodies of women. Katrina Kaif underlines one cultural aspect of this societal dis-ease, unbridled sexuality. Her body opens up the possibility that upper and middle class women in a global India may become sexually unruly by challenging familiar surveillance, hence dishonoring the Indian nation. This creation of an Indian femininity that draws on the slim figures found in the dominant Western modeling world, which have been successful in international beauty contests, on one hand announces and represents Indian success at modernity, development, economic privatization, but on the other hand is infused with an anxiety about improper, hence un-Indian sexuality. These beautiful women on public display with the potential of violating moral virtue calm public anxiety by repeatedly stating their allegiance to Indian tradition, being good wives, mothers, being virtuous and religious. In contrast, 5 minutes left?
Yes.
Oh my. In contrast, manhood and muscular nationalism is the story of success written on the male body. This changing notion in Bollywood nicely illustrates this idea of success. I don't have time to do it, but I'll just say that there's three archetypes that Bollywood moved through. The first was Pamitra Barua's in the 1930s, a feat self-destructive hero. Then was what Sanjay Srivastava calls the five-year plan hero. And then we had Rajesh Khanna, who was also sort of a feminized, overly emotive hero. And then finally, the sort of break came with Amitabh Bachchan in the 1970s, who created the angry young man and a more muscular and martial kind of view. But and he was willing to use violence, but as a lot of theorists have pointed out, when he used violence, it was almost as if he was pushed to it because of the state's unfulfilled promise to the middle classes. Whereas the new heroes, like these folks here, retains the aggression of Amitabh Bachchan, but moves to portraying a self-confident, assertive nationalism that was not evident in the angry young man character, who was frequently portrayed by being self-destructive and violent out of a sense of hopelessness. Thus, while the new woman portrays the social anxiety of the middle classes through her combination of a svelte physical body and traditional value, the muscularity of today's stars embrace optimism and express the masculinized strength of a new global India. And to get to my point about where I think that there's this uneasy juxtaposition of Hindu muscular nationalism and this other muscular nationalism that I'm arguing is associated with emerging transnational middle class, I was going to unpack a scene in a film called Rang De Basanti, which was made in 2006. And I just want to point out to you that Rang De Basanti, which is sometimes translated as the color of patriotism, is actually the color means saffron. And saffron is associated with the color of Hinduism. And it's a story about four rather blasé college kids that were kind of enjoying the fruits of globalization, and then they got transformed into these serious patriots willing to risk their lives for the national good. And this transformation was enabled by the death of Ajay Rathod, their friend, who was a patriotic Indian Air Force pilot, and showed them the true patriotism. And where these scenes, and I can't get this clip to play, where this notion of the martial man and chaste woman becomes really nicely juxtaposed is this public mourning scene, and this is the tomb of the unknown soldier that you can say, it says Amar Jawan, that means the immortal Jawan, or the immortal soldier, and then the public mourning scene very centrally juxtaposes the chaste bodies of Ajay Rathod's wife and mother with a shrine that was built to the warrior Rathod. So you see a very clear sort of lauding of this muscular nationalism. So muscular nationalism in a globally powerful India is not only embodied by the brave warrior Raja Rathod, but also the four young men who are central characters in the film. Unlike Bachchan's angry young man, who does not voluntarily use violence but pushed into it through anger and hopelessness, Ajay and his friends choose their sacrifice to demonstrate their strong patriotic belief in a muscular nationalism. I would again emphasize that it behooves us to note that the manhood expressed in this filmic band of brothers is not necessarily accessible to all Indian men, because the film very clearly defines it as a middle class idea of masculinity, and it's very much centers the Hindu upper caste male body, because Ajay Rathod, the pivotal point in this film was, of course, a Hindu man, and as I've also pointed out, the sort of ambiguity of the title Rang De Basanti. And this is where I think that the uneasy juxtaposition of competing muscular nationalisms becomes visible. And I can offer no definite conclusion, but end with a series of questions worth pondering. Given the emergence of Hindu nationalism in India, is it possible for the transnational middle class to imagine a muscular India that can remain separate from Hindu nationalism? Put another way, who are the martial men and chaste women in this new nation? Given India's political history, it would be difficult to imagine a move away from the Hindu upper caste, upper class self. And also, given the descendants of these visions of muscular nationalism, will the Indian government step up its policy of militarization? Finally, given that these visions of nation, although ascendant, is still competing with others, Gandhian, Nehruvian, communists, what will the consequences of such competitions be?